What is going on, everybody? It is Bush Fishing and we are back with another outboard repair video. In this video we're going to be cleaning the carburetor on an Evinrude 28 Special. I will have the model number put up on the screen and the parts linked down below. This boat's had some running issues and it's puking fuel out the front of the carb, so in this video we're going to be rebuilding it, cleaning it, and getting her back on the water. So we'll get straight into the video after a short little spiel. If you guys are new here, I'm Bush Fishing. I run ST Marine. We do primarily outboard repair, inboard, direct drive, stern drive, and fiberglass and gel coat and boat building. If that's anything you guys are interested in, make sure to subscribe down below. First link in the description, stmarinewi.com. If you guys are looking for service in kind of Lake Country area, Wisconsin, click that. If you guys want any ST Marine merch, second link down below. A little bit blown out in the sun, but if you can see here, we're looking at the port side of the motor. This is where everything's going to be happening. We need to get this entire bracket off with the starter to get access to one nut holding the carburetor on. The rest of it's pretty simple. It was a pretty simple job, so we're going to get started right away. First thing we're going to be doing is pulling off the power cable, and the starter solenoid's not even sitting in there. Pulling off the power cable, pulling off the ground cable, getting those two out of the way, and that'll give us access to some of the bolts behind to get this bracket off. Alrighty, so the first thing we did was disconnect the battery, so we do not have power going to the motor. We're going to take a 1/2-inch wrench and pop the nut off of this side of the starter solenoid. It's got the battery cable coming in from the battery, and we're going to remove both cables. This is our main power feed, and this is our power wires that go through the fuse and fuse the ignition. We're going to put the nut back on so we don't lose that, get around a couple threads. So with all that done, this is now free. Next up, we are going to grab, okay, not using the GoPro. Next up, 7/16, pop off the ground cable. Same thing, we're gonna take the nut off. We're gonna leave the one in the back on. We're just gonna be pulling this out of the way so we can put that back on. Our starter solenoid's pretty much out of the way. Next up, we're gonna move to the top. We got two 5/16 little bolts here that are holding on the throttle linkage. This arm is just gonna pull back and we'll be able to get it out. So we're gonna pop those two out. I'm pretty sure these are supposed to be flatheads, so I'm wondering if someone was in here and replaced those for whatever reason, because the socket doesn't really fit on the rear one, but we got it out. Alrighty, next up we have a 7/16 up here, up above the solenoid. That's gonna be coming out as well. Next up, we're going to move to the front of the motor. We got a 7/16 on a stud in here. The nut's going to come off and this whole bracket's going to slide forward. Alrighty, with that nut off, we should be good to crack this free. Just like that. It slides forward. You've got your throttle linkage out of the way. We're going to slide it forward, get it over that stud, and we're going to hang it off the side of the boat, the motor. That gives us our access to this port side nut that's holding the carb on. All we have to do is go to the other side, pop a little piece of linkage, and we'll be good to get these off. This is our primer line going into the top. All this does is when you push your key in, it gives that little spurt of fuel directly to the back of the carb, so it's bypassing it, and it helps you starting. Over here on the starboard side of the motor, we'll get these cables out of the way. This is your linkage. I'd recommend taking it out of the carb. Makes it easier to work with, but all you're gonna do is push away from you, and the linkage comes out. You can flip it up. Got our primer on this side, two flathead screws. You're gonna pop those two out, we'll get the primer out of the way, and then our nut is up here. We're gonna have to start loosening this with the throttle pushed down, and same on the other side. Alrighty, primer, pop that off. We got two flathead screws, top one and a bottom one. You only have to loosen up the bottom one. Lower one's a little trickier, longer screwdriver helps. Yeah. Alrighty, bottom one took that fully out. We'll just pull this primer up and out of the way, because the bowl is going to come with, and that's got the bracket. Next up, we're going to get this side cracked loose, the nut that's holding the carb. With our left hand, we're going to hold down the throttle. With our right, we're going to take our 1/2-inch wrench, start loosening this nut. It'll get to a point where you can do it by hand. It's not a lock nut or anything. There is a lock washer on it. Alrighty, with that one cracked loose, you'll only be able to get it out so far. I'm going to go on the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing, crack this one loose. Once they're both loosened, you're going to have to pull the carburetor forward in order to get the nuts off, because with it all the way in, you won't be able to get enough room to get the nuts out of the way. So this one's as far out as it can go. Same thing over here. So just keep going back and forth and working your way around. Alrighty, so this one came out, and so did this one. Now that both of those nuts are out, we can pull the carburetor forward, and all we have to disconnect is this primer line up here, and down below we have our main fuel feed. This one's zip tied on, this one's not. This one will pull off. They do get crusty, but that one pulled off okay. I'm gonna cut this zip tie and we'll pull this one off, and then our carb will be free. Alrighty, next up, here's our carburetor. This is the front that we were looking at on the motor. This is the back where it was mounted up to the block. We're gonna flip it upside down. There's gonna be some fuel that spills out of it, but we got 4 screws on the bottom, flatheads. We're gonna take all 4 of them out and remove the bowl. There's 1 of them, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. At this point, you can give it a little tap. That'll help break the gasket. You can try and get it out in one piece if you're really in a pinch, but most of the time when they're really old, they rip. Looks like I'm getting lucky on this one. When you look into the bottom of this, this is where your fuel pools when it gets filled. So I'll hold the carburetor like this. So with the gasket out, this is how your carb normally sits. Your float is the thing hanging down here. When your fuel comes in, it comes to a needle back here. And with the float hanging like this, fuel is free to go into this bowl in this reservoir. Now, as the fuel fills up, the float comes up and it shuts off flow. So when this is up and the bowl is full of fuel, it cuts off fuel flow, no more can go in, the fuel pump can't push any more in, and then as you rev it up, as you go wide open, this will keep going up and down and allowing fuel in. The first place you would check is behind that needle. That's where something could get stuck and stop fuel from getting into the bowl. And then looking at the bottom of the bowl here, straight in from your drain plug, it's your low speed jet. So this is where your venturi comes in. The low speed jet is down in there, and that controls your idle and getting off idle, and then your high speed is up above. So next up, I'm gonna pop off this drain plug. It's much easier with a wrench than it is with a screwdriver. That out, make sure to push the gasket back up, keep that on, and looking down in there, you probably won't be able to see it, but I can see that it is clogged in there, so that's going to be the main point we're blowing out. To remove the float, your kit will most likely come with a new float pin and seat. You're going to push in just on the corner here, and there's a little pin, a little plastic pin that comes through. You pull this out, set it down, don't lose it, and if you lift straight up, you'll see the float and the float pin that I was talking about. The pin, when it's seated, stops fuel flow, and as the float lifts up, it pulls it up and allows fuel to go through. So at this point, what I'm going to do is start spraying everything. Make sure to clear those jets out, clean the carb as well as clean the body and everything else, and then we'll be ready for reassembly. Alrighty, with those guys cleaned out and sparkly and new, and after you get carb cleaner in your eye, we're going to take our float and we're going to make sure to delicately sit it down in there, making sure the needle goes in and the little clip that holds the needle to the float doesn't come out. With that in, we're going to start the pin, line it up with the holes in the float, and push it all the way through. With the plastic ones, you got to make sure that they're fully seated because they have 2 little barbs that hold pressure on it so it can't come out. It won't be able to with the bowl on, but it's just extra safety. Next up, you'd be installing your new gasket. You're gonna set it down on top of there, making sure that all the holes are lined up. And next up, you're gonna drop your bowl on and kind of hold pressure on it so that the gasket and all the holes stay aligned. Drop your 4 screws in, 4 bolts, and tighten them up. We're gonna tighten these up until they're just snug. And then we're gonna go on a cross pattern tightening them, making sure it's squeezing the gasket evenly. Alrighty, next up, when your carb's reassembled, you have the float back on, you can check whether or not the float's sticking. Your fuel feed's down here. When you hold it upright like this, you should be able to blow air in there because the float's hanging down, it's open. And when it's upside down, you shouldn't be able to get air in because the float will be closing that pin off. So upside down, can't get anything in, upside down. You can get air through. So our float's not sticking. We're gonna reinstall the drain plug, and then we will put this back on the motor. The next step is your fuel air mixture screws on top here. Your fuel air mixture screws on top. I'm gonna count how far out it's already set. The basis for this, per the manual, I believe is 2 1/4 out. So using the little notch on it, I'm gonna turn it in, and it looks like we're only half turn out. So the further in the needle is, the richer the mixture will be, because as you put it in, it cuts off airflow, forcing it to suck more fuel through. And the further out it is, the leaner it'll run. And lean is the death of 2 strokes. But the leaner it is, the more air is coming in, which is mixing with the fuel. So it's giving you a leaner mixture. So that was half out. I'm gonna go half, 1, 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/4, just to start as my baseline while I tune it. What we're gonna do before we put the carb back on is reinstall the fuel line. Gonna push that over, that's gonna get another zip tie. You can use regular hose clamps if you want. It's such low pressure that the zip ties are usually okay. Put that on after. At this point, you replace your base gasket that connects up with the intake manifold, and then we will just get the carburetor pushed up over the studs until we can see the thread showing, because like I said before, the nuts won't fit in there to thread on with the carb pushed all the way forward. At this point, We'll take our 2 nuts, a little finicky, but we'll get them over the stud and just get that first thread started on it. So that one there is just started. I'm gonna come to the port side, which is easier. You got more room over here, and just get this one started. Alrighty, at this point, you can start tightening both of them up at the same time. Get them as far down as you can. And then once the carburetor is seated, you'll tighten up as much as you can with your hands. And we'll grab our 1/2-inch wrench and tighten them up the rest of the way. These you can definitely put some pressure on, but you don't want to put too much to crack the studs or anything. Alright, so at this point, grab your wrench and send them home the rest of the way. That one's tight. This side, you're gonna have to do the same thing. Hold down the throttle and make sure you're not loosening it, you're tightening it. With those 2 tightened up, you can grab your little baby primer line and you'll run that underneath the carb and then up to the top to that little barb where we pulled it off of. That gets no clamp, there's no pressure there. Next up on the primer. On the primer there's a ground on the bottom. That goes below the bracket and that's what gives you your ground for your primer. Throw our bracket over and we'll get those 2 screws reinstalled. Next up we'll grab our bracket. This is what's going to be sliding over this stud here. So we'll make sure you watch out for your cables, but we'll get it sat down in there, push it over the stud and then slide it on all the way. Just like that. With that set all the way in there, we can put the nut on the front stud. We can put that on, that's 7/16. Tighten that one up. That's gonna set our spacing for all the other bolts. So with this pushed down all the way, you shouldn't have to worry about lining up all the other ones. This one, you wanna make sure it gets pretty tight because that's what's holding your starter. Next up, we'll grab our ground stud and thread that one back in. That's a pretty long one. And then that is going to be a 3/8. We'll just use the wrench for because it's here. Tighten this one up. At this point we have the lower bracket bolt, which is kind of a pain. I'll see if I can get you guys to see it, but it's right down in here. That's where this bolt goes in. That one's a 7/16 head. This one's the biggest pain in the ass if you don't take out the bracket for the starter solenoid, but it is possible with an open wrench. Kinda gotta give her one of those reach arounds. Alrighty, with that one tightened up finally, I'm gonna hook up these lower grounds before I do anything else. I'm just gonna hang them, I'm not gonna put the bolt on yet, or the nut. And then we will push our starter solenoid in. So with the solenoid pushed in, I'll tighten up my 1 bracket bolt that I loosened. We're not gonna worry about that right now. We're gonna do our last bolt, which is in here up above the solenoid. That one's also gonna be 7/16. All right, with that one all the way in, we can push our throttle linkage back in the slot and we can get our little hold down in there and our 2 little 5/16 bolts started. These are another fun one. Those 2 on, those barely need any torque. Otherwise, they will snap. With those 2 installed, we can put this little bracket back in. This bracket has the little screw that stops timing from being, gotta be careful how I say this, stops the timing from being pulled back any more than it needs to be. Those 2 can get tightened up. I believe the actual torque spec is like, I think like 6 foot-pounds because it's an exhaust cover bolt. At that point, we can loosen up our power post on the starter solenoid that we took the cables off earlier, and we will grab our main power cable. I like to put the main power cable first at the bottom, and then I put the accessory wiring on top of that. That way when you're pushing all those amps through the power cable, it doesn't melt your ignition wire. That tightened up, we'll push our grounds. I'm gonna pull these guys off. It was set up kind of weird before, but same as the power, I'm gonna put my main ground on first, and then the 2 other little grounds for the CDI and ground for the starter solenoid on top of that. And then we will throw a washer and nut. And this was 7/16. Alrighty, at this point, we are ready to pump up the fuel line and make sure she runs. Last thing I didn't mention was that carburetor linkage that we took off earlier. Pop that one back in. We'll grab our fuel line and hook that back up, making sure that it's locked in place. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pump it up until the primer bulb gets hard. And we're gonna watch the carburetor, make sure nothing's leaking out the front, make sure nothing's coming out of the drain plug or the fuel line. But I got hard pressure here. We're not getting any leaks, it's not dripping. So I'm gonna do a dry fire. I'm gonna crank it and just see if it pops over, and if it does, I'll hook up the water and we'll run it. Oh, to do that, you're gonna have to hook up the battery. Forgot about that part. Alrighty, so it fired. I'm gonna hook up the hose, assuming the water's on. Alrighty everybody, that is going to do it for this video. We got it running. I just need to turn the idle up a lot. I don't like how it's sitting in the bucket of water, so I'm not going to run it for very long like that. We had a little mishap at the end. One of the cylinders was full of fuel, and I was kind of thinking the fuel pump diaphragm was cracked and it was bypassing fuel straight into the block, but it passed having it pulled off and then primed up. So I think it's okay. But after we got that figured out, we got the cylinders cleaned out. Runs pretty good, starts up right away. I am gonna put this in the lake and just run it for a little bit, make sure everything's good, make sure it's tuned for the high speed. And after that, this motor will be done. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. If this helped you, or if you have any questions in the comments, comment down below. And I'll be sure to answer them, or email st.marine@outlook.com. I'll be sure to help you out with that. But with all that being said, we will see you guys in the next one.